we're heading into the Q&A section. So I am going to pick the ones that have come up. If you haven't added your question, please put it in the Q&A box, not in the chat, and ideally upvote on some of the ones to push them to the top. So one of those, and I guess since Michael hasn't, I guess we'll let Michael answer this or pass it to somebody if you don't know. The question is, if you're a long-standing and in good standing AIA member for many consecutive years, but any given years had below the required learning units, but your dues were always paid, does that have a negative impact? So I guess if you were behind on your CEUs in a particular years.
I believe at the time of submission, you have to have all your learning units in place.
And if you didn't,
I would echo that. You know, they're not looking at all of your cumulative years and whether or not you were in good standing or not in any of those years. It's the year that you submit.
Good standing by the December of that year.
Yes.
So you can catch up on CEUs. Yeah. Can any videos or media clips be submitted?
I don't think they have a way to play them consistently. And of course, you know, if you did submit one and they couldn't play it, that won't go well for you.
Yeah, I don't believe outside links are allowed. So if you want to like put a link to a website into one of your exhibits, they're not going to click through to it.
So risky.
Risky.
If you have emeritus status in good standing and are current on their CEUs, is this status permitted to apply? I guess is emeritus acceptable?
I would say yes, because emeritus is a category of membership. And of course, when you're emeritus, CE units don't count and dues don't count. So because you're emeritus.
That's a great question. We haven't had that one before.
And do any of you know the average number of submissions in any given year?
That's a very good question. I was going to email Myrna and ask her that earlier today.
I think they're between 150 and 300.
Yeah, my guess would be just looking at the stats over the years, it's roughly about 300, you know, 290 to 315-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. And you know, maybe 50, I think at the most 100 were elevated one year, but generally it's like 50 or 60 or somewhere in that number. Does that ring true for any of the other fellows?
My year actually had 140 elevated, which was a very high year.
Very high, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Robert. It's right around 250 are submitted each year, in about 40 to 50% get elevated of that in one way or another.
Okay. Many of this person's reference letters are from retired FAIAs. Is that a problem? And what do they do for letterhead?
I'll take that, Michael.
I don't know the answer to that.
So they can be letter reference writers. If they're retired and don't have a company logo, they can put it on their own personal letter. They can just put their title and address on the letter. The one thing I was going to say is that make sure that if you're resubmitting, that if you have a previous letter writer, you do have to go back and make sure that they're still alive. Yeah. We've had people who've been disqualified because they had submitted a letter writer, and in a follow-up, and they were told that in their comments, and in the follow-up, they didn't update that letter, and it actually led to a disqualification.
It's because really the mix of letters can change from year to year. Online, you indicate which reference writer you want to include in section 4. So you can ask them to resubmit a new letter. You can put in a new reference from year 1 to 2 to 3. But it's in terms of letterhead, I don't think the jury is looking for somebody with letterhead. It just has to be a valid person. If it's an architect, needs to be in good standing. An AIA member, good standing.
I do think the current instructions say if they're with a firm, they want it on the firm letterhead.
That's correct.
Or if like an institution like Santa Barbara.
If you're writing in the voice of that entity, then it needs to be on their letterhead.
A question from the Fellows Committee Staff Liaison. How does the new process for nomination signatures work? I think that's on the form.
It's electronic. So I believe I didn't go through the application process online, but it's electronic. So you're going to give the name of the email to the secretary of the chapter or the president, and they're going to email that and then get it acknowledged.
Yeah, if you're talking about the nomination from the chapter, yes, that's how it's an electronic process. If the question is also about the signatures within your actual nomination, you actually have to have a physical PDF signature on the PDF that you submit for your exhibits.
Yeah.
But I think afterwards they ask you to submit one. Once you get elevated, they ask you to submit it without signatures so that they don't publish the signatures.
You got to redact the personal information.
Yeah.
Question. Is there a good way to find an experienced consultant to guide the process and review the package? The few that this person had been referred to in the Bay Area have retired. Any new recommendations?
It's challenging.
It is challenging, and there's a large conversation within the college about whether one needs to actually or ought to need to hire a writer and a graphic designer. But I would say if you're not a good graphic designer, make sure you hire a good graphic designer or have someone within your firm who does that work. It does make a slight difference. It doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to look good. It doesn't have to be fantastic graphic design, it just has to look good. And you should have someone edit it. So if you have a marketing person that writes well within your organization, that's great. You can work with someone to just read what you've written.
Yeah, I would reach out to the various chapters that have fellow committees and try to reach into their networks, because someone will know someone who will know someone.
Yeah, there's about 10 or 12 that across the country that do it. I know, but I know several have retired, definitely here on the West Coast.
Okay, sorry. As a second-year submitter, am I required to have my original 7 letters rewritten and addressed to the new chair?
No,
No.
they're already on file.
If you these keep bouncing up around, are the jurors aware of how many years you've submitted?
Yes. And they're looking
And
they're looking for you to respond to the comments of the jury
Exactly.
with them.
that is a disqualification. If you submit the same thing and it hasn't been responsive, they won't review it.
I mean, it's not the same as a thesis or something where you have to put in a page where you've made the edits. It just should, in your story, should be clear that you've responded to the comments of the jury. If the font was too small, the pictures were too whatever, as long as it's clear that you have responded, then they'll like that.
And your second and third submissions can be entirely different. You don't have to just update the year 1. You can swap out exhibits, you can change your thread, you can change your object.
And in many cases, that's what happens, right, Aaron? I mean, the
Mhm.
jury's comment might be that we don't think you fit in object 4, you should reapply in object 5. So if you come back with object 4, obviously you didn't listen to them. They're not likely to elevate you.
Yeah, I knew someone who submitted an object 5. They were told that they should move it to 2, but they didn't change their approach. So they submitted almost the same thing in object 2, and they they didn't write the story as object 2. So,
Another question, along with a nomination from a local AIA chapter, does a sponsor have to be an AIA member? Can a sponsor be an associate AIA member?
That is a very good question. My response would be that it should be a regular member, not an associate member as a start. It doesn't have to be a big name, but your sponsor is speaking to a jury of fellows. So if you can have a fellow write that letter as your sponsor, a fellow speaking to fellows is better than anything else. Even though I don't think that there are any specific requirements about who your sponsor should be, outside of they should know your work and be able to coach you along the way.
Okay, this is a broader question. Are there any financial or economic benefits to becoming a fellow? For example, is there any relief in a waiver or reduction of AIA membership dues and or ability to keep the credential for either AIA fellows or AIA emeritus members or AIA emeritus fellows, and or for those who retire and become emeritus? It's a long one, but it has a couple likes.
Well, other than potentially more compensation because you are a fellow in your employment contract, if you're with a firm, might be beneficial. If you're a sole practitioner, some clients look for fellows as an architect to hire versus any other. It is a fantastic, great, good housekeeping seal. And so to that degree, in your marketing effort, it may be beneficial. I don't think there's any difference between regular member, emeritus member, when it comes to fellow. I don't think they really call you emeritus fellow. It's just you're an emeritus member who is a fellow.
Okay. Someone was very appreciative of the informative presentation, but has a question. If it takes 900 hours of work and comes down to 5 to 10 minutes, it feels pretty fatalistic. And I would ask, why do it at all? What's the benefit besides being recognized by your peers?
Being recognized by your peers, having your body of work recognized by your professional organization probably is one of the most wonderful things you can do in your career. Because we are all architects. To have your peers recognize you in that way, I think is very nice, very rewarding.
I do not know of a single fellow that I've talked to who said it wasn't worth it. They've all said it was worth it. They all said it was really tough, but they've all said it's worth it.
yeah, I would add that we certainly didn't intend that comment or that point to be fatalistic. It's just like an RFP. If you want to get that project, don't be going on and on and on about it. I mean, Robert, you went through millions of RFP responses, and they put them in a category: yes, no, very quickly, and maybe. So it's really about understanding what the process is, how to tell your story in a very compelling and succinct way, and not being caught about your entire story, being very specific.
And I would add, from the public sector, Aaron, you're right. I've seen hundreds of RFPs in response to projects that we put out, and you might think, well, how can you tell if it's overreaching? It just reads through the document that it's overreaching. So if your nomination is reaching a bridge too far, then the jury just sees it like a banker handling counterfeit money. they train to handle real money. So when the counterfeit comes across the counter, they know it immediately. So you just have to be clear and honest and succinct about it, and not try and overreach, because they'll see it immediately, and then you go in the no column.
Yeah, actually, I didn't mention that in the exhibits section. Whatever you say in your summary about your accomplishments and your impact, if it sounds a little far-fetched, they want to make sure that it's represented either in a news article or an award, or your client actually acknowledging it, or a reference letter. So they're looking for your story and your impact, but they're also looking for proof that it's true. That's what your exhibits and your reference letters do.
Okay. This is a question. My accomplishments seem to span a couple of categories. What's the best way to determine which category is the right fit? I think that's one of the main challenges. Who wants to answer
What
that?
stands out, which project stands out the most might be a start. Among the two of them, which one has had the greatest impact? Was it a local impact or was it a national impact? Aaron's example of his work being picked up by others across the country is a great credit to the value of those projects being replicated in other parts of the country. So if this one of these exhibits that you're suggesting, one of these projects, if that has been the case, that's the one you want to highlight.
Yeah, I would say focus on your thread and your impact first, but also be aware of what your collateral that you have that supports it. So if you have 3 different stories that you think might be compelling, if you have significant more collateral that can actually be convincing, or say your main thread, and this is, I think, part of the problem with Object 5, is that when you're serving society, you're doing it selflessly. And so you're not out there promoting it. You're not out there being recognized for it. And so unless someone else is actually tooting your horn for you, it's really hard to prove. So if you don't have the collateral, then that's going to be an uphill battle, specifically really for Object 5.
And Object 5 can include service on a design review board, on a planning commission, on a committee, a conference. If there are one candidate here in Santa Barbara did that, went for Object 5, and so we got screenshots from public TV of him on that panel, talking about item number 5 or whatever it was. But it was a series of images off of TV, recorded film, that helped to support that exhibit. So as Aaron says, you're not out getting accolades for serving on the planning commission. Probably more the opposite, really, depending on the way the vote goes. But that's one way to get that exhibit done.
Good example. Next question. What if I've been nominated by my chapter in the past? Does this carry over to this year?
No, the nomination works for 3 consecutive years. So you're nominated once and it carries over for the 3 years you're in the process. But when you break, you've got to do it again.
This is a question confirming being a primary firm architect that primarily focused on California public works education primarily for approximately 40 years fits the bill for Object 4.
If you're a public architect, yes.
Yeah, I would say if you're in a government agency, quote unquote,
Exactly.
public works, then Object 4 would be it. But if you're in education doing public projects, then it would be category 6, Object 6.
Thank you. This is kind of specific. What if you're an AIA associate for over 20 years but switched into building international terminals, maritime terminals, restored the Oakland City Hall after the '89 earthquake. Could you be considered for the FAIA board?
I'm just going to take a leap that I think they really mean, are they eligible for fellowship? And I think we would have to check to see if there are restrictions from associate members submitting for fellowship. I've never seen an associate member submit for fellowship, but there's no age range. I mean, if you're 20 and you have a great story and you can demonstrate that golden thread, there isn't any reason why you shouldn't be nominated if you have a body of work that supports it at 20. So I'm not quite sure where it stands as an associate member. They're
I think
assigned.
you do have, you do have to be an AIA member
Yeah.
for
So
a cumulative of 10 years. And right. It's unlicensed. Associate is unlicensed.
yeah. So there's the distinction. You need to be licensed.
Okay, this one, like your help, because my name is in here. This person was nominated by the chapter and is planning on submitting in 2025. However, Joyce Me said that 2026 might be more realistic. Is there a time limit on the nomination? I think 2025 means 2026 for the fellowship, but
Yeah. So
clarify.
If you work really hard and this is the only thing you do between now and October, it is possible for you to get your nomination done. One candidate here in Santa Barbara didn't start until she submitted in June. She got it all done by October and submitted it and was elevated in the first round. So it is possible, but she stopped practicing, and this is the only thing that she did. So it is possible, but it's more likely and more realistic that you start now and you get your material together and you spend the next 16 months or so to submit in October of 2025.
Yeah, the cycle here in San Francisco chapter, there's 3 review submissions. And so if you start in January or even June, what they want to see is kind of your thread and summary page in the first submission, which is July. The second submission, they really want to see a pretty full 90% packet. And I think if you aren't there and they don't think you're going to be able to pull it off in another month, then they'll ask you just to wait out. They'll just ask you to wait to next year. And then the third review happens in mid-September, and that should be the 99% done, so that they're just checking for final punctuation, let's just say. So it's highly unlikely, if you haven't started by now, that you're going to make it for October.
I would agree with that, because San Francisco and Los Angeles have a very particular nominating vetting process. If you want the chapter's support on that nomination document, then you go through that process. Other chapters don't have the same level of scrutiny. So it depends on your assigned chapter. And I think I saw in the chat that San Diego said they've got a fellowship committee, so we ought to add them to that slide.
Does work outside the states count? I would say yes, because I had some international in my submittal.
Global work is fantastic. Yeah.
Someone else says, I'd like to submit for category 1 design. However, I only have one at the California state level awards. Do I need national awards, or will press at the national level be sufficient, such as Fast Company, Wall Street Journal, etc.?
The press
National, yeah, all press helps. National awards is a myth. You don't have to have national awards for your design, but you do need to have 5 solid. In order to submit an Object 1, you need to be the lead designer in the minimum of 5 of your projects that you submit in exhibits.
Yeah, those projects came off of the end of your hand when they were done.
Please confirm that you can be elevated in the first year without any further input. The answer is yes.
Yes.
Can you verify again the definition of good standing as it relates to CEUs? Is the CEU verification only for the year of submission, or does it go back in time for 10 years?
It's only the year of submission.
Yeah, if you're behind in your CEs and they send you a letter, which I've received over the years, and I think they send them out occasionally. I don't think they send them to everybody. You just have to get caught up. Once you're caught up, you're in good standing, and that's it.
Who is the presenter in the jury discussion?
Aaron.
There's 7 jurors, and they divide the nominations amongst them. They each review 35 or 40, and the juror that has been assigned to review your nomination, they spend about an hour on it. They are the ones that present you, and they may vote, they may not vote for you, or they may be a voting member on your submission, or they may not be.
Yeah,
They
might-
won't be from your region, though.
If they're from your region, they won't be. Yeah. Oh no, you're right. They will not be reviewing your from your region, and they don't allow them to vote either. They won't review it, and they don't vote on yours. That's correct.
Yeah, one juror sets out.
Next question, how is authorship as one of many contributing authors to a technical ebook publication considered?
The part that you wrote.
Yeah, you can recognize that it was a group effort. You know, we worked on a Pathways to Leadership or something. AIA published it, and there was about 15 of us on that document that authored it, quote unquote, and we all, each of the fun fellows that I know used it as their in their submission, and just credited the
A candidate
other authors.
worked on the architectural graphic standards book and did the parking section in, I think, version 7 or something like that. And so that was his exhibit, and he got it signed by the publisher. And everybody uses that book. It's like the Bible to everybody. Well, at least in paper mode anyway. I think it's all digital now.
When it was books.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Are international associate AIA members, meaning members recognized licensure in other countries, eligible for elevation to fellowship?
Yes.
I believe we have an international, quote unquote, chapter.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's technically a chapter, but there is an international component, and maybe it is.
It's like a
Yeah.
V's, I think they call themselves a chapter
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
Representing all of Europe, of course.
Do you need to be licensed architect for 10 years? You need to be.
I think
AIA.
technically, because you need to have your license in order to be an AIA member for that year.
Yeah.
And so you need 10 cumulative years that you're licensed and an AIA member. Not cumulative.
I'm not
Yeah,
asking-
cumulative.
Cumulative.
Yes.
And it's a regular status, right? So there are associate members, there are regular members, and there are emeritus members. And so we're all AIA members as a group, but it's the regular membership as a licensed individual.
Right, not unlicensed or associate. Yeah.
Correct.
Someone's asking about bundling projects. Can or should multiple projects be bundled into a single citation? Example, let's say you've done several health wellness centers and want to cite 2 for their specific and unique attributes. Does that make sense?
I would say yes. I mean, you got to make it clear, right? I mean, it's a body of work that you're talking about in that exhibit, but it needs to be clear. If it's the same client, it's helpful. Well, Aaron, would you have a different take on that?
Well, I think it depends on the topic of your exhibit.
Yeah.
If the topic of your exhibit is, say, you're on the planning commission and you have X number of projects that you influenced on the planning commission, and that's your exhibit, then it makes sense to have multiple projects within an exhibit. But if you're a healthcare architect and you have, 30 projects in your portfolio that you want to think about, and you're narrowing it down to 5, my guess would be, if you're picking 2, you would want to have them as 2 exhibits. I don't think you'd want to combine them into a single. Maybe you have a slightly different angle, or they both can support your thread, and they can have a similar story. But I would suggest that they be separate. If they're part of your 5 projects, you have 1 project per exhibit.
I agree.
Okay, another question, if you've worked in California solely and primarily all your work is in the greater Southern California and San Diego County, does that kill you on the whole geographical aspect?
Well, you've got to show the ripple. If
Yeah.
there's an effect of your work, if architects or others have picked up your work as their inspiration in other parts of the country, and you can demonstrate that in a real way, then you're not limited. My case, my work was limited to the county of Santa Barbara. You can't get more restrictive than that. I didn't have a single project outside of my jurisdiction. But the work we did in sustainability was picked up by numerous organizations and municipalities across the country. So that's how I was able to reach outside of myself and make it happen. So you just have to show that ripple effect.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I think there's 2 other ways. If you're really regional and local, there's 2 other ways that you can get that national, international ripple and effect. You can present your work at SCUP or AIA, at national conventions. You can be part of a planning group that puts on a conference about a certain topic that relates to your design work. But more importantly, if you mentor, and this is really important, almost all nominations have a really strong mentor thread, or I would say a good significant amount of the nominations. We all mentor our younger staff, and those staff leave. They move on, they go back to grad school, they move to other parts of the country, and they take what they learned from you with them. And so, I think it was last year, one person I knew put in their nomination had a letter writer who was a high school intern for him, who is now a licensed architect working for a national company. And so, and it was a local residential architect. And that was one way to show the broader impact.
So Joyce, I wanted to jump in there. There's a question about the feedback from the jury if you're unsuccessful in any of the years. And yes, the support staff to the jury are taking notes during the deliberation of your particular nomination, writing down what the jury found that was lacking. They will have a post-op with you. The staff will have a post-op with you that goes over the comments the jury made about your submission. And that's where you're going to understand how successful or not, in this case, it was to the jury. And then the following jury, because these juries, I think they're on for 3 years. So it's likely in the 3-year period of time, you're going to have the same jury, or pretty much substantially the same jury, looking at your nomination. And if you haven't replied to those comments, then they won't be very happy.
Now we only have a few more minutes. What category would be recommended for accessibility or ADA consultant?
I would say
Technical.
3.
That could be, well, it could be 3. if you're doing research and helping build codes and that sort of thing. It could also be technical advancement in object 2.
Yeah. Mhm.
So there are some overlaps. I guess we're getting close. Joyce, I wanted to, there was one question here about my brother is a fellow and they work together. And would that be a good sponsor or would it be bias? I think it's best if your sponsor is not from your own firm.
Or a
So
relative.
yeah, I don't know if it would be biased if it's a relative, as long as they can really make your case. But I think what they're looking for is people who know you from outside of your own practice.
Because that's going to be a big jump, isn't it? That's a long bridge to get across to make that case.